e-commerce or retail business is full of data. There is definitely like no shortage of data and the possibility to at all times like track any kinds of metrics. Conversion would be the king, or revenue, of course. But besides that, you have your abandonment rate, your return rates, your micro conversion metrics as well, and so on and so on and so on. And when we tap into the value for the customer, for the experience, this is much harder to measure because in a lot of cases it is subjective. And here there are existent metrics like NPS, Net Promoter Score, which talks about the experience of a particular customer with all of the interactions with the brand, but it talks about not just about the single transaction, but about the summary kind of like of all these touch points. Or there are more granular ones like CSAT, like customer satisfaction. That one is looking at a one-time interaction. So, hey, I was looking for the new toothbrush, and I managed to buy it, and I used it. And what do I feel about this particular experience? Not about the brand in general. And then there is the more granular is customer effort score. This is where you can ask about how difficult or otherwise was that to find the product. How challenging was that to complete the purchase, for instance? Kind of like how clear or the other way confusing was the understanding like where your product is at this very moment. Nevertheless, these are all the attempts like to introduce the metrics. But when we're talking about the long-lasting relationships, which are built on understanding the customer, we need to be looking at CLTV. We need to be looking at the customer impressions and sentiment as well. Therefore, it is important to talk to the customers. It is important kind of like to ask these questions directly or indirectly as well, because sometimes like customers are struggling to as well explain what exactly do they feel about it. So we need to be prepared to have an all-round view of that. But secondly, it is about prioritizing it over conversion. And this is probably the most challenging part for a lot of brands, because you have the absolute numbers kind of like versus a bit less tangible metrics in this case. So to start with, we need to understand exactly what is our, or we as any brand, what is our authenticity, where does it lie, and make sure that we're consistent in this communication across channels, across segments, and so on, that we're not only talking the talk, but also walking the walk, so that our communication is related to our actions. So if we are saying that we're sustainable, it should be seen in our supply chain, in our products, in our other endeavors, and so on and so on. The tips to owning the conversation at all touch points might be a bit too high. I would say you need to limit what is all for you, the most important touch points. Here, the main advice would be understanding where your customer is and understanding where your potential customer is as well. So existent versus people that might become your customers in the future. And then it is about differentiating signal from noise, because you might be spending your marketing budget at the channels that are just hyped at the moment, but not specifically the channels that have the possibility to have the dialogue with your customer. And from that perspective, you might be working with much smaller communities, for instance, but having a more genuine dialogue, and they would become your ambassadors, and it would help you much more versus bombarding without any personalization, for instance, kind of like with the messages on the social media or even the media like TV and so on and so on. There are the obvious sectors that literally just have a more possibility to have access to your personal data and therefore can like build a more confident dialogue around that. But once again, like with the respect for this personal data, with the respect for attention and so on. And I would tap into the usual ones like the big tech, like Amazon, Apple, Google, because they own the ecosystems that have touch points in every segment of your life, from storing your experiences, like in terms of photos or videos, to communication, as in, for instance, like email and so on, or as, for instance, like in the case of Amazon, it's much more vast. They have smart homes, and the smart homes can like come as well with a plethora of different kind of devices, like, I don't know, voice-enabled microwave that also tracks what you eat and can give you an advice on nutrition, or even the possibility for them to understand like how healthy you are or not. And then those would be on the top of my list. But of course, there are lots of retailers as well that are doing with different level of success, but we're all trying. And of course, sports is a good one because it is a passion driven, but it is a performance driven thing where people tend to stay quite loyal if products seem to satisfy their needs. So they would be coming back to it, and they would try to as well kind of like learn a bit more about these products and what works for them as well as the other way around. So we touched upon that from the mindful technology aspect of things. So one part would be is just to have a good understanding of all the communications and all of the touch points that you have with the customer. The second part would be is to have a good strategy based on this understanding that taps into the respect for their attention, the privacy, and so on. But when we talk about the digital touch points, yet another trend to talk about is the natural UI or zero UI, so-called. It strives to give the possibility for the users or the customers to interact with the system, or in this case, like it could be a website or the app, or eventually, for instance, like a front window of the store or whatsoever, through the natural means. What do we mean by natural means? Something that is available to you without the additional, device like phone or screen of any kind, or mouse and keyboard. And I'm talking here about seeing, tactile, so you can operate with gestures, for instance, kind of like, or just talking as well. And this is exactly what we see is happening right now with the rise of generative AI, with that can translate what you say into more tangible results for you and so on. Therefore, lowering the cognitive load from the necessity of understanding, like, where is this navigation, like, where I can find this product, like, using the search, like, did they search for the right thing? Did they use the typo or not? Kind of like, and then filtering it. Instead, you can just explain your intent. And if the brand already has the understanding of your previous purchases and the preferences, kind of like, we can cater much more for that, and we can give you an answer right away, and we can show it to you in a way that is more appealing, because some people look for, I don't know, specific information. I need, the consistency of the fabric, kind of like, how is it going to fit and so on. Some people are more driven by the image, for instance, and so on.